Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Hometown Heroes. I'm Mike Kenichi, and tonight is part 2 of our tribute to legendary high school and college basketball player Maria Conlon. And Maria, I want to thank you for coming on again. Part 1 was a lot of fun. So let's get right into it, Maria. You finished your high school career at Seymour. When did you have a good idea that you were going to go to Uconn, and what other schools were recruiting you at the time?
Yeah, so probably around my sophomore, junior year of high school. A little bit more my junior year because that junior summer for AAU was a really important summer. You know, Uconn was touted as one of the top programs in the country. So my goal was that if I got offered a college scholarship to go play there, I was going to go take it because I was big on, I want to play with the best, I want to play for the best, you know, and I wanted to win a national championship, and I felt like that program was going to give me the best opportunity to do that. In terms of you know, being recruited, you know, I used to get thousands of different letters from different colleges all the time. I had it narrowed down to really 3 schools. I wanted to stay, you know, within 4 or 5 hours of driving distance of home, because, you know, I love my valley. I love my mom's home cooking, so I didn't want to go too far. But I was looking at Penn State was up there and Rutgers. So Penn State, Rutgers, and Uconn were really my last 3. Boston College a little bit as well. But I had really narrowed it down to Uconn and Penn State at the end. And then obviously, you know, my thought was if I was going to get offered a full scholarship to go play there, I was going to take it. Right.
So now, did you meet with Gino your junior year, or more so like the beginning of your senior year? How did it work out when you talked to Gino and decided you were going to come play?
Yeah, so the recruiting process is interesting because there's different periods where you can have communications with recruits that are in high school. So I would talk to Chris Daly a little bit. I would talk to Jamel Elliott, Tanya Cardoza, Gino. And every once in a while, more phone calls because you really can't do a lot of that in-person stuff. My senior year, which I had already verbally committed, and then in the beginning of my senior year, around October, November, you know, I signed my national letter of intent. Then I had my home visit. I did my campus visit. You know, so I did those things. But I knew pretty early on that, you know, the University of Connecticut was the right fit for me.
Right. And what was your first meeting like with Gino? I mean, were you intimidated? I mean, you're a young kid. Again, you're probably 17 years old. So how did that feel for you? Did you feel like, you know, he was this larger-than-life human being?
Yeah, you know, I remember I went up for a campus visit, and I met with him in his office. And intimidated maybe a little, just in terms of, you know, this guy obviously holds the keys to whether or not I'm going to get, you know, offered a college scholarship to come play here type of thing. I would tell you he's a lot nicer in the recruiting process than he is later on. I'm just kidding. Half kidding. But very down-to-earth guy. You know, we talked about a lot of different things. We talked about, you know, the Valley and me growing up here and him coming to watch me play and things of that nature. So, you know, pretty casual, pretty normal.
You know, I'm glad you brought up Chris Daly, because a lot of people don't realize, I know you girls do, but the impact she has had on that program is tremendous. I mean, she keeps Gino from losing it sometimes when the referees make a bad call, or if a player did something wrong. She always keeps him in check, and she's a big part of the success that this program has had over the last 25 years.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, CD's they're very different. Gino and CD, which is why I feel like they mesh really well together. You know, he's kind of, you know, driver, this is the way that it's going to get done, and he's not like a bull in a china shop, but kind of a little bit like a whirlwind. And then she really is there to focus on the day-to-day stuff. How do we represent the program? You know, making sure your shirt is tucked in, that your socks are all similar and things of that nature. You know, planning different activities for us and making sure that everything's in alignment, you know, along with obviously making sure that we're performing on the court. So the two of them really work well hand in hand together.
So now let's talk about the first practice you have with the team. Now, a lot of people I've talked to over the years, when they start playing college ball, the first thing they always say is how they threw up like crazy after that practice. Did you go through that your first couple practices?
I did that in preseason. I think all of us that came in that year, there was 5 of us that were freshmen. And I think the preseason was hard enough where we were definitely puking a couple times. I remember the first practice was like 3.5, almost 4 hours long. And it was grueling. And I just remember going back to my dorm room that night, and I think it was like 7 o'clock, and I just passed out.
Really?
I was just so exhausted, mentally and physically.
Right.
But you get this. It's very different when you transition from high school to college.
Yeah.
The speed of the game is different. The physicality is different. And the mental portion of playing in college is very, very different. So it was probably the hardest I had ever worked in my life up until that point.
Right.
So definitely very taxing.
Right. And, the thing is, and I'm not saying all coaches are like this, and I don't even know if Gino is because I've never seen him coach in practice, but a lot of times the difference between being in a high school program and a college program is they're giving you a scholarship. So their attitude is, I'm not here to necessarily be your friend or mentor. I'm here to hopefully make you a better basketball player, but we want the team to win. So he was probably difficult in the sense where he didn't care if, the practices were grueling or if you didn't like him. His mind was the program, and that's all he was worried about. So as long as that was getting done, that was his biggest concern.
Yeah, I would say that he definitely exactly what you just said. I think you hit it on the head. He, once you're in college, they don't really care if you don't feel good or if this practice is a little bit more tough than you thought it was going to be. You just got to kind of push through, and everybody goes through that a little bit. You're juggling a lot more schoolwork than you ever have in your life before, a lot more freedom. And then you have practice, then you have weightlifting, and you have study hall. So you're juggling a lot as a freshman. But I would tell you what I think that Gino's always really been great at is really trying to get the most out of each player, whether it's every single day in practice or overall throughout the season. So a lot of the way he coaches in practice is to do a lot of that. I mean, for example, we had practice players that were all league players in high school that were guys, that we were playing against. So they were bigger, faster, stronger than us. And the whole theory behind that was that he wanted to make the practices so much harder than the games, so that when you got to the games, both mentally and physically, it should be like a walk in the park. And in a lot of cases, it was.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Now you're playing with, obviously, you dominated in high school. You were the best player in high school. But now you're probably playing with girls who were probably the best players at their high schools, and you're talking Division I players, obviously. Mm-hmm. I mean, was that a big adjustment for you in the beginning? I mean, was it hard? I mean, obviously, it's got to be a little hard because this is new to you. I mean, did you go through some rough patches?
I think that your expectation when you go to a place like the University of Connecticut, and I think that they do as a coaching staff a really good job of recruiting the type of player that can do this, you have to check your ego at the door.
Right.
You can't walk in there expecting, that you're going to get as many minutes or as many shot attempts, or even if you look at Diana, who, the best player in the country. I mean, until junior year, she probably didn't even take the most shots on the team per game for her first 2 seasons. But yet she was the best player on our team for all 4. So I think that you have to understand when you go to Uconn, it's not necessarily about, he doesn't run plays so that one person is going to do all the shining there. Right. Whereas if you look at a different school, you may have players that score way more points than the top player at Uconn. But that's just because, but you're probably not going to win a national championship. So when you go there, you have to make a decision when you commit to the University of Connecticut. The decision is not, all right, am I going to go and be the best basketball player in the world? Now, you might be in certain circumstances, but it's, I'm going to go there and I'm going to do what my team needs me to do to win a national championship. So, certainly as a freshman, you make some adjustments. I don't know if that adjustment for me was as big as just handling everything in general, that you have to handle as a freshman in college and being an athlete. The checking your ego at the door and kind of being okay with the fact that you're going to learn from the upperclassmen and, eventually get to the point where hopefully you could be that person and then people underneath you will learn. Right.
The question I always ask anybody who plays college sports is, where do you get the time to study and make sure that your schoolwork isn't being affected? Because you girls are traveling all over the country, so you're going to miss classes sometimes. How hard was that in your 4 years trying to juggle the team and your studies?
Yeah, it's really hard. I remember getting home at 3 a.m. from playing at the University of Miami, and I have an exam at 8 o'clock the next day. And you're on the plane all night, and now you're going back, and you're on the bus to the dorm, and then you're at the dorm room, and it makes it really hard. I would tell you that the professors, at least at the University of Connecticut, as long as you give them notice, they can work with you a little bit on stuff like that. But to say that it's a walk in the park to juggle all those different things in college and be traveling, and it's not like a lot of sports where it's like a 3-month season that you're traveling. I mean, we're traveling from basically November 1st to April.
Right.
It's pretty much the entire school year, and we don't really get to go home for the holidays. We don't get to experience all that. We just play right through. So, it's hard. You got to really be great with time management. If you need help, you got to enlist a tutor.
Right.
You may be up studying till 12 o'clock at night and have practice early the next morning, and it's just the sacrifice that you have to make in order to do both.
Right. So talk about your sophomore, junior, and senior year. You were in the mix a lot. I think freshman year you played a little, but not as much, correct? Mm-hmm. So talk about freshman year. Number one, you probably didn't play as much as maybe you liked, but you knew that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. But sure. Talk about the games you were able to get in. How did you feel freshman year went?
Yeah, freshman year, I remember coming in, and again, like I said earlier, being completely overwhelmed with everything. The speed of the game, the physicality of the game, juggling,
right.
Academics and sports all at the same time. And then about, I think it was December 1st hit, and I got mono. So I was out for a good 2.5 months of my freshman year with mono.
Right.
Then I remember coming back, and it was interesting. I always tell people that getting mono my freshman year was actually probably one of the best things that happened to me, because I was able to watch.
Yeah.
The way people practiced, the way that things were happening. And when I remember coming back, I felt a lot more comfortable with everything just because I was in it, but I didn't have to do it every day. You always say that the power of observing and analyzing sometimes we take for granted. So I remember coming back and it just be having a little bit of a different drive and fire underneath me. And then, Svetlana got hurt.
Right.
Then we went into the Big East tournament game, Sheriff tore ACL. So now we're down 2 guards going into, the NCAA tournament. We get down to St. Louis in the national semifinal, and Diana picks up 3 quick fouls.
Yeah.
Kenitra Johnson, who usually comes off the bench, goes in. She picks up 3 quick fouls. And I remember he came down to the end of the bench and he threw me in. And I remember making a 3-pointer and getting an and one and making a free throw. And, from there we ended up, we were up by 20 at halftime, and we ended up losing that game, which was terrible.
Right.
But I think from that point on, for me, it was kind of a little bit of a turning point, like, holy cow, I can do this.
Right.
Because I think that sometimes when you make that transition from high school to college, it's not easy for everybody. When you look at Diana, for example, what she did our freshman year, I think, is unique, because not a lot of freshmen in college. It's a little different in high school.
Yeah.
Freshmen in college to be able to step in and play significant minutes, especially on a team like Uconn, is very, very unique.
Right.
And she struggled her first month or two, and then on the back half of the year, she really excelled. But that's really, really hard to do.
Right.
So I feel like for me, you start to have all these different questions in your head. Well, can I do this? Am I good enough to play here? Am I going to be able to do all these different things? You tend to get a little bit insecure. And I think that national semifinal game for me was like, all right, I can do this. And I spent a lot of time in the off season working really, really hard. Came back my sophomore year, and we returned, 6 or 7 really, really good players that played a ton of minutes my freshman year. So, I was first or second off the bench my sophomore year, but those starting 5 still played a lot of minutes.
Right.
We ran the table and we won a national championship. So, I played a lot of minutes that year.
Right.
But I learned a ton that year.
Right.
Being in the mix.
Right. Let's talk about that semifinal game, though. You girls were up by 20. You end up getting beat. One of the things I kind of get annoyed with when people say this, well, you'll get back there. You don't know if you'll get back there. And, when people say that a lot of times,
sure.
I think they have to be in the battle, battling to see how hard it is. But, I mean, it is hard to get back there. So how crushing was that loss? Because you don't know if you're going to get back there.
Yeah, it's funny because you look at a lot of athletes. There's a lot of great athletes and a lot of great teams out there that have never gone to a Final Four.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I mean, Ray Allen.
A lot of really tremendous teams and tremendous players that have never been to a Final Four. So you're absolutely right, and I think a lot of people take that for granted and they just assume, whatever, you're returning everybody, you'll be back here again next year. You don't know. Injuries happen.
Yeah.
Stuff happens all the time.
Yeah.
And a really cool story about our freshman year. So we had Diana and myself, who played, a little bit our freshman year. Obviously, she played a lot more than I did. Then you had Morgan Valley, who played a little bit, then she got injured. And then you had Jessica Moore and Ashley Battle, who both redshirted our freshman year, but they came in with us. And all 5 of us, at the end of that game, I remember we all were kind of sitting next to each other in the locker room, and I'll never forget it. We all kind of looked around at each other and looked around at all of our teammates crying, and we said, we will never again feel like this.
Right.
We'll never be put in this position again to lose like this in a tournament. Fortunately enough for us, we never had to, because we ended up winning the next 3. We didn't know that at the time. We just kind of looked at each other like, no, we're going to do whatever we have to, to band together to make sure that we never have this feeling again, because it's a crummy feeling.
Right.
To lose in the national semifinal, to be that close to something you've worked your whole life for and your whole season for, and to come that close is really crushing. But we just kind of, we said we never are going to have this feeling again, and we didn't.
Right. Describe to me what a Final Four experience is like, though. Like, never mind the game itself, just like the week leading up to it, when you're playing this, the game to go to the championship. What is that week like for a student and player?
Yeah, so you typically go, like the week before down to wherever the Final Four is. So you can get acclimated, to the area if it's a different time zone or whatnot. You have study hall during the day, and then you have your different shoot-arounds, a ton of media. There's a lot of hoopla around the Final Four and a lot of distractions. There's a lot of stuff going on when you go to the Final Four besides just basketball, and it's really hard sometimes to just say, here's why we're here, and we got to, business as usual. We're going to come in, we're going to do our shoot around, we're going to go have our pregame dinner, and we're going to come back and, we're going to put on a show. But I tell you, there's nothing more fun than playing in a national, championship game and a Final Four, and all the people that are there. I mean, you're talking about selling out huge arenas, and playing in arenas where professional athletes play and things of that nature, and it's really, really fun.
Right, and it had to be a lot of fun for your family, your parents, your brother, being able to experience that. I'm sure they made the trip.
They had more fun than we did. They're the ones that got to really experience whenever we played. I always joke around, my senior year, we played in New Orleans.
Right.
And I'm positive that my mom and Diana's mom had way more fun in New Orleans than we did. There was one time where they came back to the hotel room and they had their faces painted, and they had like 30 Mardi Gras bead necklaces on each. Right. And I was like, I don't even want to know how you got those, Mom, but I'm glad you're having fun here, as I ship off to practice. So, I always say it was great because it was awesome that I got to travel and see the world and see the country and all of that. But it was really awesome to have my family come along and experience a lot of that stuff, because it's not every day that you get to say that, I went to a Final Four here, and my family got to experience a lot of that stuff with me, and definitely very unique and special, and they're memories that I'll have forever. Right.
Now, you and Diana graduated together. You both, played 4 years together, and you had competed against each other. Did you form a friendship right away, though, freshman year? I mean, were you two close right away, or did it take some time?
Dee and I hit it off right away. We had very similar personalities. We were, of the 5 of us, the 2 more goofy, outgoing, more charismatic of the 5. Morgan was very quiet, very shy. Jessica was from Alaska, so she was a little quirky. And then you had Ashley, who was from Pittsburgh, who was very studious and kept to herself. And then you had Dee from Cali and me from the Valley, and it was just like, her and I hit it off immediately. Very, very similar personalities in terms of interests in music, and like I said, we would both walk into a room and immediately make friends and things of that nature. So for us, it became really easy. The 5 of us, they used to joke around about halfway through the first semester, we all became very, very close, and we would call each other. Everybody would call us the fam. Because they would say, if you saw one of us, you saw 5 of us, because we would travel in like a small pack. And even to this day, I have a text message group, and it's titled The Fam, and it's the 5 of us. And, we'll send a picture of this or that, and it's, everybody still calls us the fam, or we'll call each other the fam. I went out to Diana's wedding a couple months ago, and, we had to get a picture of the fam because all 5 of us are together. So, it's hard to not form a bond with people when you spend that much time with them. So all of us, really became good friends. Sue, Shay, they're both good friends of mine. So it's fun to build those relationships over the years. Right.
So sophomore year, you start seeing a lot more action. You're coming off the bench. And this was a big year for the team. One of the things people forget, too, when you played, Uconn had, at that point, won 2 national titles. They still had not went on the big runs that they would go on. And, in fact, you were the first 3-peat team that Connecticut ever had. Talk about your sophomore year, because you had a pretty good year, especially, with assists. I mean, you were very unselfish. You knew Diana, was the one you had to go to, and
Yep.
you didn't care about individual stats. Talk about that season, and how did you feel you played?
Yeah, sophomore year was fun. I feel like I had some ups and downs sophomore year. I had some really great games where I played well. I had some games where it was a little bit of a learning curve.
Right.
You know, not getting as many minutes. You know, my freshman year, I still had a little bit of a learning curve in the game, because it's
Right.
one thing, you know, to get a lot of minutes in practice and get a lot of reps, but to get them in the game was a little bit different. And our sophomore year, it was kind of like a picture-perfect season. I mean, we beat everybody by a lot of points.
Yeah.
You know, we went 39-0 that year, and nobody really sniffed us at all.
Right.
And it was just fun to watch. And then, you know, we graduate Sue, Swin, Tamika, and Asia, and they're the first 4 picks in the WNBA draft.
Yeah,
so
it was crazy.
You know,
yeah.
I mean, it was just fun to watch that all year, you know, especially after coming off the way we lost our freshman year, and, you know, and be able to see that, and not, you know, we used to knock on wood all the time, but we stayed healthy that year. There was never really any major injuries, which was great.
Right.
And it was just fun, you know, because everything kind of fell into place. After my sophomore year was where it got, you know, a little bit interesting, because we graduated those 4 players.
Right.
And I remember, you know, that summer, you know, Chris Daly used to joke around with us, but she used to say, you guys aren't even going to make the NCAA tournament next year. You're going to go to the NIT. You know, she would do that to kind of, you know, get us going a little bit. But we were bringing in 4 freshmen that were going to have to play significant minutes, because we were only returning Diana, myself, Ashley, and Jessica, who played any significant minutes the year before.
Yeah.
You know, coming off where we were returning 4 people that played all the minutes.
Right.
So that was a really, really difficult year. I would say that my junior year in the beginning was a difficult year, just because you're bringing in 4 new personalities with these freshmen who are all highly touted.
Right.
So again, you're playing with some egos, and everybody's got to check them at the door. And we really relied on them to play well, because we had no other option. So I started, you know, as point guard my junior year. And it's funny, because we talk about now our junior year and our senior year, Diana and I used to say they should have been flip-flopped, because our junior year seemingly went pretty flawless. You know, we went on to win 63 games straight.
Yeah.
You know, we ended up losing to Villanova in the Big East championship game, but then we went on to win the national championship. So it was interesting, because, you know, that year went pretty, you know, effortless, you know, in terms of that. You know, and that was an amazing accomplishment, because we weren't picked to win the national championship by anyone that year.
Right.
I mean, we lost 4 starters, 4 freshmen coming in. You had a couple people that played, you know, decent minutes, but nothing really significant, and we had Diana.
Right.
And we had a tough schedule that year. You know, we played Tennessee away and at home. You know, and we won both of those games. You know, we really had a tough schedule. But we band together, and we won the national championship, which was really awesome.
Right. You know, you talked about Sue. Was she like a role model to you, or like a mentor? I mean, she was a couple years ahead of you, great player. And I mean, you know, people forget the impact she had at UConn. I think most UConn fans know, but, you know, sometimes as the years go by and the team is winning like they are, it's easy sometimes to forget about the people who started it. Talk about Sue a little bit and the impact she had to the program.
Sue definitely was always a role model and mentor for me. Her and I clicked pretty early on as well, my freshman and sophomore year.
Right.
You know, just personally in terms of, you know, our parents were friends off the court. And I viewed her as like, listen, I'm going to have to guard her every day, which was painful, because she's really, really good. But, you know, if I could take a little bit from her every single day in practice, I just remember I used to watch her. I used to watch her decision making, but most importantly, I used to watch her poise. You know, if you watch her, the way that she plays the game is just so effortless. You know, every decision is calculated, but it's calculated correctly. She very rarely ever made any errors, which you can't really say in the point guard spot, because in the point guard spot, it's like you have 10 assists, but you may have 5 turnovers.
Right.
Right? You know, she'd have 10 assists and she'd have 1 turnover or 2.
Yeah.
You know, and she was like that, more of the silent leader type. You know, Swin was a little bit of the louder one of the 2 of them. But I always just, you know, I always admired the way that she played the game. You know, just so effortlessly, and you can just watch her play. And you know, in my opinion, she's the best point guard to ever play for the University of Connecticut.
Right.
You know, I don't think that there was one that was better than her prior, and I don't think there's been one since. And I'm probably not alone in the way that, because I don't really view Diana as necessarily a point guard there.
Right.
But I mean, in terms of point guard, I can't even think of across the country a better point guard that's ever played the women's game. to this point. So I view myself as pretty fortunate, but then also I say I'm fortunate because I got to play with Diana and Sue and Shay. But then I say to everybody, but I also had to guard them every day in practice. That wasn't so much fun.
Sure. Right.
So, Sue had a huge impact on our team sophomore year and had a huge impact on the program.
Right. Mm-hmm. So now talk about this a little bit. The Big East started to get a lot better when you were playing. I think Notre Dame was always very good. They were a tough opponent for you girls. You mentioned Villanova. I think the worst thing, in my opinion, to happen is when they got rid of the Big East. I thought it was one of the best conferences ever. Talk about playing in the Big East and some of those teams.
Yeah, I loved playing in the Big East. I still now, we always just joke, like, what are we called now? What teams are in our league? It's kind of, it's kind of crazy. But, we formed a lot of really great rivalries in conference. You had Boston College, which was right around the corner. Yeah. So those were always great games with them. You had Villanova, that was really good. You obviously had Notre Dame. You had Rutgers, that always had a great program. And then you had some other teams that started to become, a little bit up and coming. Syracuse was good there for a little bit, Virginia Tech, Miami. So you had some really, really nice teams in conference that would give you a little bit of trouble. I couldn't even, if you asked me to name 5 teams that are in their conference now, I couldn't even do that.
I couldn't either.
I just thought that what the Big East stood for and the way that it was divided and all of that stuff was just great, because geographically it made sense and it created those geographic rivalries that you could have within universities that you don't really see them anymore, which is unfortunate. So I would say that most people that played for Uconn or that were big Uconn fans, 10, 15 years ago definitely missed the old Big East games. Like the Big East tournament, for example, at Madison Square Garden for the guys, so much fun to watch. It was one of my favorite tournaments to watch, sometimes even more fun than the NCAA tournament,
more fun. Yeah.
And now we don't have that. It kind of stinks. Yeah. So, but what are you going to do?
I used to laugh watching Diana play because I always felt like she played with a chip on her shoulder, and I always felt like she did it to kind of shut Gino up. But I always thought Gino did it on purpose. Gino would try to get her so mad at him that it would just elevate her play. Talk about their relationship and the way they used to go back and forth, because they used to go at it with each other a little bit, but I think they both brought out the best in each other.
Yeah, they had a funny relationship. Definitely like a love-hate type of relationship where, they'd be yelling down each other's throats 1 minute, but then they'd be hugging and kissing 2 seconds later. And their relationship has kind of always stayed like that. I'm sure if you asked her today, she'd probably tell you, yeah, he made me mad last week, but we're friends again today. Right. So that's kind of the problem with the two of them. They're very similar. They're very, very, very similar personalities, in terms of the way that they approach things, and they're very, very stubborn, both of them. So to watch them interact on a daily basis was always very comical for the rest of us. But I think that you're right. I think that, if you really peel all of it back, they made each other better. Right. They made our team better, the way that they did interact with each other, because, she definitely always wanted to prove him wrong or to prove a point or to prove something, and he used to do the same thing. Well, let me see how mad I can make her today. It was always fun to watch.
Right. Who was more frustrating for you, the car rides with your dad on the way home after a game, or Gino, when you went back to your dorm? Who made you more mad?
It was a toss-up. We used to... I remember the 5 of us, we used to get in the car and we'd go drive down to 7-Eleven and get a Slurpee. And we would just bash him. We would just talk about all the stuff he did that day to piss us off. Yeah. We couldn't believe he said this. We couldn't believe we had to do that, and blah, 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 blah. But you know what? At the end of the day, we respected him. It made us better. It made our team better. So probably a toss-up between the car rides with my dad and kind of, I had to deal with Gino a little bit longer than I had to deal with my dad being my coach. Right. So I guess maybe Gino. Yeah. But yeah.
Your senior year, it was a very interesting year because both the men and women won the national titles. In Connecticut, they've only had the Hartford Whalers. That was basically their only professional team when you think about it. And they really had not established themselves with sports in Connecticut. And I feel like the men and women really put sports on the map for Connecticut. Talk about, just the impact that both programs have had for the state.
Yeah, it's really cool when you think about it, because Calhoun's always done such an amazing job with the men's program. Yeah. And Gino had always done such a great job with the women's program up to that point. And, here we go. We win the national championship our junior year. We're returning everybody. So automatically we're expected to win the national championship our senior year.
Yeah.
And, you know, our guys go and they make it to the Elite Eight, right, our junior year.
Yeah.
Now they're returning everybody.
Right.
Now they're expected to go win the national championship. So I remember the magazine was Diana and Emeka were on the front cover, and it was basically that both of our teams were going to win the national championship that year. And I remember all of us thinking, oh, like, God, they just jinxed us. You know, maybe one of us will win or whatever. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, my junior and senior year were interesting because my senior year was a hard year. It was a hard year. You know, we lost some games that we probably shouldn't have. It was like our senior year should have been our junior year. Our junior year should have been our senior year. But it was hard. You know, we clashed a little bit. You had some egos going on that year. We had some people that, you know, just weren't playing their role the way that we wanted them to. And we couldn't really get into our groove. You know, and the men had a great season, but they lost some games that they shouldn't lose.
Yeah.
So we had kind of a similar path. And then I remember, you know, we lost to Boston College in the Big East tournament at the Civic Center, which was kind of crazy, and we were really bummed out about that. And we went into the NCAA tournament with a little bit of a chip on our shoulder, but a little bit bummed out. You know, that 2 years in a row we lost in the Big East tournament. You know, we really wanted to win that. And I remember the guys, if I'm not mistaken, they ended up winning the Big East tournament.
Yeah.
They beat Pittsburgh. I remember Talik made that three-pointer on the top of the key from really far back. And so I remember we went into the tournament, and, you know, obviously we were friendly with our guys' team, and we would say, all right, we would check in. We did our job tonight, you guys do your job tomorrow night. And I remember we were at a restaurant in, I'm trying to think of where the heck it was. Well, it was in New Orleans, obviously, but I can't remember what restaurant it was. And we had already won the national semifinal, and the men were playing in the national championship against Duke.
Right.
Right? Or no, was it?
Semis and then they played
Duke.
Georgia Tech.
And it was a close game. I think they only ended up winning by
a
three.
point.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. He
Duke
made that
hit a three-pointer
at the buzzer from like half court. Right. So, and I remember we were texting with them like, all right, now we're going to take care of business. Tomorrow night you guys got to make sure you take care of business. And it was crazy that it actually happened. Yeah. And it was mayhem on campus. I mean, we went back there, and it was, you know, it was cool the 2 years before when we went back onto campus, and there was people everywhere, and there were, you know, people going nuts and partying and doing all this other stuff, and we both won. Right. I mean, no one has ever done that.
No, it was unbelievable.
You know, I mean, now we've done it again since, but you know, back then it was the first time that a men and women program had both won it in the same year, and it was cool because we were both expected to in the beginning. It wasn't like one of us was expected to and the other just kind of had a Cinderella story. Right. It was like our paths were meant to be this way, so it was really, really unique.
And what was really funny too is, again, you know, I think you made the Final Four before them, but then you won the national championship after them. It worked out where you played on a Tuesday.
Correct.
Yeah, yep. So, you know, it was kind of like back and forth, and I mean, it was a lot of stress because early on in the national championship game, you girl, they were battling you girls, but then you pulled away finally. But like that was the big thing. Like nobody wanted to lose because the men had just won, and it would have put a damper on things. Right. And it's a credit to like both coaches, the players, you know, everybody, the community, the college. I mean, it was just a tremendous time in Connecticut.
Really, really special. You know, something that, again, like I said, we've done it since, but all of us that played in the national championships that year could say we were the first ones to do it. Nobody could take that away from us.
Right. You know? Now, I've always wanted to ask you this. Now, you mentioned you went to Seymour High School. You chose not to go to Derby. But one thing I always liked was Derby never took that personally. And in 2003, I think it was like maybe May 4th, May 5th, they threw you a parade. It was Maria Conlon Day in Derby. Talk about that feeling, because I know it was probably a little embarrassing to you because you don't like that attention. But that had to be a tremendous feeling, the fact that your town that you've lived in your whole life had a parade for you.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I think that, you know, growing up and then going, you know, I associated with Derby because that's where I'm from. That's where I was raised. Right. School-wise, you know, I went to St. Mary's St. Michael's. I never really went to Derby public schools, you know. Urban, so that was always a little different for me. And then choosing to go to Seymour High School, you know, there were some people that made some comments about me doing that and weren't, like, thrilled that I chose to go to Seymour instead of going to Derby. It's like, if I had gone to Sacred Heart or St. Joe's, they wouldn't have cared because at least I chose to go to a private school. But to choose another public school over Derby was kind of like a little bit of a slap in the face to some people, I think. At least, That's, in my experience, what I heard. And so, interestingly enough, when I went to college, anytime that they would announce me, it was never that I was from Seymour High School. I was from Derby, Connecticut.
Yeah.
You know, it always said that underneath any of my stuff. Because it's just like that. It's, you know, if you went to St. Joe's, it would have said, I still would have said I was from Derby.
Derby, right.
You know, so I associated myself as a Valley girl.
Right.
You know, and I always viewed the Valley as kind of one big town, because whether you're from Seymour, Oxford, Derby, Shelton, you know, unless it's like the Derby Ansonia game or the Derby Shelton football game or things like that, people from the Valley band together. You know, when someone's in trouble or something's happening, you know, that's what I've always admired most about the Valley is the blue collar working, and just that people genuinely care about each other no matter what. There's no those lines. Right. So I've always associated myself as from the Valley. And then, you know, experiencing that, you know, for me, it was always just kind of interesting because, you know, to have Derby associate me, you know, kind of finally a little bit as this is my town too, you know, it was an awesome feeling to be able to go back. And you're right, it's a little embarrassing for me just because I don't like attention on myself like that. But to have my town that I represent, you know, kind of be in the spotlight a little bit. I mean, Derby was heard a lot while I was in college for 4 years. Right. It was brought up a little bit more than it probably normally would have been. Was really unique. And I think the most important part was I was able to give back a little bit to one of the towns that gave so much to me growing up.
Did you get a little choked up by it, or was it just...
Yeah, you know, it's I always say now, when you're in the moment and you're a young kid, you don't always necessarily understand the magnitude of things that are happening to you, whether it's a national championship or it's something like that. When I reflect back now, you know, I think now I appreciate all of that stuff a lot more because you understand what it means. You know, as a 19, 20-year-old kid, I was just focused on going back the next year and winning another national championship. Right. But to be able to have that and see how many people came out that day to support me was really, really fun and unique, and definitely something that I'll always cherish and remember.
Right. You know, you talked about that first national championship you won your sophomore year. That was a very tough time in the world. As you know, September 11th had happened. Let me ask you this. I mean, when the season first started, I mean, I remember everybody was panicking. People were afraid to fly. People were afraid to go out in big events. I mean, you're playing a game of basketball. Maybe you can't think about any of that stuff all the time, but was there some fear in the beginning of that season from the team? Like, you know, the uncertainty of like what the world was? I mean, were you a little nervous in the beginning of that season? You
know, I think that anyone who says that they weren't a little nervous about uncertainty in the world that year is probably fibbing a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Did I understand, again, the magnitude of that as a 20-year-old kid?
Yeah, it's kind of hard.
As I do now? Probably not.
Right.
You know, I remember for us, travel was a little bit different. It was a lot harder. You know, stuff took a lot longer back then. And things of that nature. I remember when we played in the national championship game, they did a huge tribute to 9/11 before that.
Yeah.
You know, with military and flags and things of that nature. And I think that, you know, we kind of went into that season. Now we had Sue Bird on our team, who is from New York. So she had some people that were impacted, you know, directly by that.
Right.
You had Swin Crash, who's from Pittsburgh, who was directly impacted by some of the stuff that happened down there. So we had some people that were pretty directly impacted by a lot of the stuff that was going on. You know, and I think we all just kind of went into that season saying to ourselves, you know, you can't take anything for granted.
Right.
You know, here we are, we get an opportunity to do what we love, you know, for free at the biggest stage that could be possible. You know, and there's other people that are out there, you know, just waiting for a loved one to come home or waiting to hear if a loved one, you know, didn't make it and things of that nature. And it helps put stuff into perspective for you. So I think it did that for us. You know, again, like I said, the magnitude of what was going on, I don't think we necessarily realized as much as we do now. But it was impactful. All that stuff was really impactful.
Right. You know, it's not easy. Number one, it's not easy to get a scholarship to a, you know, prestigious college like Uconn. Number two, it's not easy to find your way on the court. You know, you were able to do both. But how difficult was it? And I mean, did you put a lot of pressure on yourself? Because guess what? Every year coaches are recruiting, and you never know if they're going to recruit somebody to replace your position. You may be the third person, you know, at your position. So say you're the third guard that goes in, they may recruit somebody in your place, and then you may be the fourth one. So how hard was that for you? Like, because you had to always step up your game to make sure your spot was always there.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think you're constantly at that level putting pressure on yourself, whether it's just to make yourself better, to get playing time, or just help the team get better. I think that as college coaches, if you're not trying to recruit somebody who is hopefully going to push the people you have to be a little bit better, you're probably not doing your job correctly.
Right.
So I think you're always feeling a little bit of that. But listen, if you're doing what you're supposed to do in the off season, you're putting the time in and you're working really, really hard, at the end of the day, all you can say is I put my best foot forward in order to do everything I possibly could to get more minutes and put my team in a position to win. And if you could put your head down on your pillow at night and do that, you should be satisfied with that. So, I didn't worry too much about that.
Did you enjoy like your off seasons? Did you still manage to like put that aside and say, it's summertime, I need to enjoy my summer and kind of not think about basketball all the time?
But basketball's your life. It's like a full-time job for you. And, for us, there really was no off season.
Right.
It was just a matter of, all right, we don't have any games, but what are we doing in order to prepare for the next season? We stayed up at campus and we took courses over the summer and we did workouts up there and ran camps and played pickup. So it was really just ongoing.
Right.
So I think really it was just more of what do I need to do in the off season to get ready, to get better and get ready for next year.
Right. So now the final game ends, you win the national championship, you three-peat, which had to be a thrill. I mean, to three-peat, and you won at Seymour. So you're talking 5 championships in the last 8 years for you. But let me ask you, was there a part of you that was sad because it was over? It went by so quick. I mean, you continued to play basketball, you went overseas and stuff. But for more or less, your career was starting to wind down a little bit. I mean, was there a part of you that was very sad to see it end?
Yes and no. I would tell you that when you're in practice and you're doing all that, it doesn't feel like it's flying by. It feels like the time's never moving.
Yeah.
I think as an athlete, you get to a point where you kind of feel it coming,
Right.
So you feel your time. Listen, I wish that we could just keep playing our same team every single year forever. That'd be great.
Right.
That'd be super fun. But, it's like breaking your life into different chapters of a book and, understanding that, all right, it's my senior year. And I think as long as you prepare ahead of time mentally for this is my last year, this may be my last year that I ever play organized basketball again at this level, right?
Yeah.
And you go into it with, I'm just going to have the most fun that I possibly can. I'm going to work the hardest that I've ever worked and put myself in a position where I don't want to flash backwards at the end of this year and regret anything that I did.
Right.
In terms of my output, in terms of my experiences. So I think for me, that's the way that I approached my senior year.
Right.
Is it a little bit bittersweet? Yes. But I would tell you that it's a little bit more bittersweet in terms of like, I don't get to travel on the bus with my teammates anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And have the fun that we had in hotel rooms and travel to all these nice restaurants and eat steak. Yeah. Those are the things I would tell you that you miss a little bit more because basketball wise, you understand that your chapter's ending.
Yeah.
And then maybe a new one opens and maybe a new one doesn't.
Right.
But the bittersweetness for me came a little bit more with just the relationships that, we all still have great relationships, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
You don't see each other every day.
Right.
You're not traveling together and experiencing the same things together. So I would say that those things are things that I miss more than going to practice every day, than playing in front of 20,000 people every day. Those are memories now that I'll always cherish, but they're not necessarily the things that I truly, truly miss about being in college.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about, you came back to help Coach Frager at Southern, I believe, in 2007. And I believe if I'm not mistaken, they were Division II national champs.
Yep.
Yeah. But before I do, when you graduated college, did you have a goal to get in coaching right away, or is it just something that kind of happened?
Athletically, I graduated in 2004. And like a lot of us with the traveling and things that we do, we don't always take as many credits as a normal student to graduate in 4 years. So I actually stayed on for a 5th year.
Right.
And I was like a grad assistant with the Uconn team.
Right.
So I got to sit and listen to Gino for a whole nother year, but from a different perspective, which was nice.
Right.
And for me, I never thought about coaching. Everybody used to always tell me you make a great coach. You're a point guard. You do a great job coaching on the court. You'd make a great coach. And I always used to think in my head, just because you're a good basketball player doesn't correlate directly into being a great coach.
Right.
Because there's something to be said for somebody who has transferable skills. You can teach things that they're really, really good at. Not everybody can do that. And some of the greatest coaches, like Gino, for example, is a horrible basketball player.
Right.
Some of the greatest coaches were never good at the sport. So
Right.
it's kind of twofold there. So I went and I played overseas after that for a couple of years. And then when I came back, I actually got my real estate license and was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my, a professional career.
Right.
And Coach Frager reached out and he asked me if I'd be interested in coaching. And, I hesitated for a second because I wasn't really sure if that's what I wanted to do.
Right.
So I went and I did it for a year. And I loved coaching. I loved being able to pass on my knowledge, and help players of, a different caliber, get to the next level and watch, you watch a player grow from the first practice to the last practice. It's kind of amazing to see that transformation that they have.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we won the national championship, which was really fun.
Right.
And I loved it. But it was a grind. Coaching in college is a grind.
Yeah.
And so after that, Coach Frager took the job over at Fairfield University, and he did ask me to go with him. And at that point in my career, I just wasn't interested in, coaching at that level anymore. I wanted to coach in a different aspect, so I took a different route with my career. But I loved it for the time that I did it. I was super passionate about it. I loved, this past year I went back and coached because I coached in high school.
Yeah.
And I actually liked coaching high school better than I liked coaching college.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like you can make more of an impact on the kids at that point.
Yeah.
Both personally and on the court. Whereas in college, the kids for the most part kind of have their personalities already. They kind of have their work ethics already and things of that nature. But I really feel like in high school you can make a major impact. So I really enjoyed that.
Right. Now, let me ask you, is there ever a goal, as far as high school, it doesn't have to be college, but is there ever a goal to be a head coach someday, or are you fine just doing what you're doing right now as an assistant?
Yeah, I don't know. I always thought, maybe when my daughter gets old enough, if she wants to play, I'd love to coach her team, whether that's, a travel team or a high school team or an elementary school team. And, I get asked all the time if I'd want to coach in high school, and I'm not, at this point, no, just because I don't know if I could juggle being a mom, coaching, and having a full-time career all at the same time at this point. But I'd love to, maybe down the road, be able to circle back and do that. For right now, Coach DeMarco has given me a great opportunity to be an assistant and stay around the game, which I really liked. I missed it. I didn't realize how much I missed it till I coached last year.
Yeah.
But I really loved being around the sport, being at practice, coaching, and again, giving some of my basketball IQ, giving back to the sport that gave so much to me. So I think in some capacity, to answer your question, in the future, I'd love to be able to do that. I just don't know when that will be or at what level I want that to be at.
Right. So, you've had so many honors. I mean, I mentioned all your high school honors, and then that carried over into college, the 3 national championships. I believe you're in the Connecticut Hall of Fame. You're also in the Uconn Hall of Fame. I mean, let me ask you, do they ever get old? Like, I mean, every time you get recognized for something, do you get that feeling like, wow, this is amazing? Or do they become muddled because there's been so many of them?
I think for me, I was taught at a young age, and I always try to tell young athletes that I speak to now to try to look at accomplishments this way. I would tell you that no accomplishment that's recognized ever gets old. If it should never get old.
Right.
You should always celebrate the hard work that you've put in, because it's not just about you. When I celebrate any of my accomplishments that I have, I celebrate them with my family that helped me get there. I mean, I remember my mom having to drive 2 hours on Tuesday nights to drive me to AAU practice and then sit there for 2 hours. I remember my brother having to schlep in the car with her, so that I could do these different things. So for me, it's not about just celebrating my own personal accomplishments. It's about celebrating what other people gave up for me to be able to do that. It's about celebrating the teammates that I had that helped me accomplish that along the way, the coaches that mentored me along the way to be able to do that. So definitely not muddled. I think every accomplishment has a special place in my heart in its own different way on different levels. But I think as an athlete, as a human being, as a person, I try to stay humble, about my accomplishments, but at the same time, be able to appropriately celebrate them in their own unique ways when I do experience them over time.
Right. Everything that you've done, I would say the biggest challenge is being a parent, because, now you're a parent and you got a young daughter, as you mentioned, and, that's a lot harder because, you got to keep on top of her and things like that. Talk about what that's been like, being a parent as opposed to being a basketball player. I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, being a parent to a 5-year-old daughter right now seems way harder than any practice I had to go through.
Yeah.
She's 5, but she thinks she's 22, so
yeah,
it's definitely been a little bit of a struggle. But, really the way that I'm approaching, parenting, I've taken a lot of what I've learned through sports and through coaching and everything else throughout the years is, I want to raise her to be a good human being first.
Yeah.
That's first and foremost the most important thing for me. I'm going to raise her through the Catholic Church, to have her faith that way. And, I want her to be a good person. And if she becomes a good basketball player, great. You know, I
Right.
would be super happy about that.
Yeah.
You know, but first and foremost, that's what's more important to me, is kind of teaching her the things that I've learned. You know, stay humble.
Yeah.
You know, care about the people that sacrifice things for you in order to help you get to where you are. Be nice to everybody around you. You know, and learn and live your life a specific way. Because I really truly believe that if you can do those things, you know, appropriately, long term, everything will work out the way that you want it to. I'm not saying that there won't be bumps and hurdles along the way, because that's life and it makes you tougher. But my objective as a parent is really just to accomplish that one thing, is to flash forward 40 years from now, and hopefully I'm still on this earth, and be able to say, all right, I raised a good human being.
Right.
You know, and if she happens to be a good basketball player, you know, that's great. I want her to be a good student.
Yeah.
And all those other things first and foremost. And that's the way that I was raised. You know, my parents were super supportive of everything that I did, you know,
Yeah.
both personally and professionally. But they raised me to act and behave a certain way in terms of the way I am with people and out in the public, and to carry myself a certain way. And, you know, I feel like for me, those lessons are far more important than anything I learned on the basketball court or in the classroom.
Right. Now, is she involved in any sports yet? I know she's
Yeah.
only 5, but I mean, do you
Yeah,
have...
she's 5. So she, if you ask her right now what she wants to be when she grows up, she'll tell you Uconn basketball player number 5.
Oh, nice.
So which is awesome. But she does gymnastics, she does jazz, she actually does CrossFit Kids.
Oh, nice.
So she's doing a bunch of different things to stay busy. I think this year is the first year I can actually start to sign her up for some organized sports.
Right.
Because she'll be 6 at the end of November, so she kind of falls on the cusp.
Now, is she
month-wise.
kindergarten or first grade?
First grade.
So you
yeah.
got through that.
First grade, she goes to St. Mary St. Mike's.
Nice.
So she's following in my footsteps there, and she loves it. So
Maria, let me ask you before we wrap this up.
Sure.
What has been the most rewarding thing to you, whether, you know, it's sports, professionally, whatever, what has been the most rewarding thing to you, you know, in, you know, your short life so far?
You know, I'd say a couple different things. You know, I think, you know, as you mentioned before, the hardest job that I'm ever going to have is being a parent.
Right.
So I'd say probably the most rewarding thing that's happened to me thus far in my life is being able to become a mom. I would say the second thing that's been really rewarding for me is that I'm at a point now in my career has given me the ability to give back to a lot of young, you know, student athletes, and being able to go speak at different events, or whether it's through coaching, you know, being able to give back to the sport that's given me so much has been really, really rewarding.
Right.
Being able to give back to my community and do certain things that, you know, maybe I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do if my career didn't take me to where it took me.
Right.
You know, I find really, really rewarding. I mean, I've gotten to travel and see the world,
Yes.
you know, for free, just because I could dribble and shoot a basketball. You know, and I try to just live my life, you know, knowing that I can't take that for granted and take anything that I get or have, you know, moving forward for granted. So, you know, I would just say those few things, and the, you know, the relationships that I've built over the years, you know, through sports and through different things are just really rewarding as well.
Right. And finally, what advice would you give to the younger kids today who might want to be a great baseball player, great softball player, or basketball player? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, you know, I think I'll say the cliche thing first, which is, listen, you can do anything you put your mind to, you know, which hopefully a lot of people are hearing nowadays. But I would say number 2 is never underestimate your work ethic. You know, both the way that you approach the sport, whether that's practice, you know, put the time in, really make sure, you know, it's not like I woke up one day and I just all of a sudden can make 3-pointers with my eyes closed. It took hours and hours and hours and reps and reps and reps, and watching videos and watching the sport over and over and over again. I feel like, you know, kids nowadays neglect that. They think that they're just going to be able to go to practice for 4 hours a week and they're all of a sudden going to be a great basketball player. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
It's what you apply when you leave the gym that really is the differentiator. And, you know, I would say the second thing is, you know, watch the way that you carry yourself, you know, because it's not necessarily, again, just the way that you hit a ball or you bounce a ball. You know, it's the way you interact with your teammates and your coaching staff, and the way that you carry yourself that will also help you get to the next level. You know, and then the third thing that I'll say that's cliche, but like, get good grades.
Right.
You know, make sure that there's a reason why it's student-athlete, not athlete-student.
Right.
You know, so again, you can go out. I'm not saying to go out and practice in your backyard for 4 hours every day and don't do your homework. Do your homework first and then go out and practice for as many hours as you can, because all of those things all come hand in hand. You know, and you can't really have one of any of those things without the other.
Well, Maria, this has been a lot of fun. This
Yeah.
has been an honor for me. I really appreciate you
Absolutely.
coming on. And what you did, you know, for the Valley in general, and how you carried yourself and how you carry yourself today, I think is remarkable, and I really do appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, it started out as a young 8-year-old girl in 4th grade. She carried it over into high school and became High School Player of the Year. Tremendous accomplishments that carried over into college. She played for one of the premier colleges in all of sports, and she went out there and won 3 national titles. All those accomplishments are tremendous. They should never go unnoticed. But you heard her talk about the most rewarding thing is being a parent, because at the end of the day, what you do in your everyday life is the biggest victory. And Maria Conlon does that each and every day that she goes out and does what she does. If you talk about legends and you talk about legacies, Maria Conlon definitely has one. But I bet if you asked her if the legacy of a person is based on the lives she's touched and the people she's loved, she would tell you that's what she'd like to be remembered by. For Hometown Heroes, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.